welcome to the Local Live, and tonight's show is all roundtable. And fortunately, I'm joined by New York State Senator Shelley, who represents the 37th Senate District, which includes Larchmont and Mamaroneck. There's a lot to cover, and we want to hear from you. Contact information's on your screen. And Shelley, I want to start with money and taxes in particular. People complain all the time that it's very expensive to live in New York State. New York's one of the most highly taxed states, and whether it's income, property tax, or any other tax or charge. And with the elimination or restriction of the SALT deduction to $10,000, people really feel it. So, is any relief in sight?
Well, first place, let's acknowledge what you're saying. It's incredibly burdensome at the local level, the tax burden we have here, particularly in Westchester and particularly in Larchmont and Mamaroneck and throughout much of Westchester. It's just incredibly expensive. But we shouldn't underestimate the impact of this SALT change, because this really, in my view, changed the rules in the middle of the game. I mean, you were willing to move to Mamaroneck or Larchmont or Rye and pay taxes because you assumed that was the way they were going to be deductible. Then all of a sudden, basically one day, it amounted to a change to this 10,000 limit. I think that is a game changer. I think it's very unfortunate. We have tried at the state level to moderate it, but frankly, until we get a new Senate and in Washington, we're not going to be able to get rid of it. I think we should try for that. I think that is a critical thing. That being said, we have made permanent the tax cap, so it's not subject to negotiation every year. We did that, one of the first things we did this year.
So tell me, the 2% tax cap.
Well, it's not always 2%.
Okay, so what is it?
It's tied to the Consumer Price Index, but it is around 2%. Some years it was lower, some years slightly higher, and determined by the comptroller. And instead of making it expire every few years and have to be renegotiated and used as a bargaining chip, we passed at the beginning of last session, when we first became the majority, with our colleagues in the Assembly, signed by the governor, a permanent tax cap.
So permanent meaning until there's another administration, or permanent?
No,
forever?
Permanent unless the laws change.
Unless the laws change.
So we don't have to go back and renegotiate. So look, it's not a perfect solution to high taxes. I believe there's a number of things. One of them is I believe the state should pay a greater share of our education costs so the burden does not fall disproportionately on single-family homeowners who are paying the bulk of our school taxes.
So even if you have a property tax cap, don't people end up getting charged another way, whether it's increasing county and local taxes or extra fees for different services?
Well, it's not. I wouldn't characterize it that way. We try very hard not to sort of do a bait and switch where we keep the tax low here and then we add expenses there. It depends on the state's economy. That's one of the challenges of every year redoing the budget. This year we are anticipating a budget shortfall for some Medicaid reasons. I don't know the numbers. The governor presents his budget. That's the process. In January, the Assembly and the Senate respond. We have less power than he does in the budget process. And by the end of March, we have to have an agreed upon on-time budget. The goal is always to keep taxes as low as possible, not to raise fees, not to bait and switch, and that's what we're committed to. I am committed to. I'm very mindful of the burdens that property taxpayers have. I would say the biggest share is school taxes, and that's why as chair of the Education Committee, my desire is to have a fairer distribution of state money and more state money and less reliance on local property taxpayers.
We're going to come back to education shortly, but you keep reading and hearing that people are leaving New York State, especially the wealthy. Is that true, or is there any
Well, I
statistics?
think the first statistic is that people are leaving upstate New York, not the region surrounding New York City and the city of New York. So I really think we shouldn't overgeneralize.
What do you mean by upstate?
Well, I mean, seriously, Western New York, Buffalo, the southern tier on the border of Pennsylvania, and the northern section of New York, which borders Canada. And probably some of Albany area is doing well now. So I wouldn't overgeneralize. This is a talking point that some conservative people like to throw out there. Downstate, we're not losing people. People still want to come to New York and to the suburbs. I mean, this is a fantastic place to live. The cost of living is extremely high, not only taxes, but the cost of housing is so disproportionately high, something I care deeply about. I'm very committed to trying to come up with better ways to have affordable housing for working people here in Westchester. I'm worried Westchester will become a county of only wealthy people and very poor people, and that the middle class will be squeezed. We have to continue to work on it. But to simply say all rich people are leaving New York, you know, President Trump may have changed his residence. I think he's an outlier on that.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue this discussion. Stay with us.
Greetings, everybody. This is Jake over at Post Wine and Spirits, and I'm happy to be talking to you today on LMC TV. And we opened just 2 weeks after Prohibition in 1934, and we've been operating ever since.
Welcome back. We're talking to State Senator Shelley Mayer. Call in, write in. It's your chance to talk to her, get your questions in, or make your comments. Okay, so we're talking money. People are concerned about the value, their property values,
Right.
with the high taxes and the high cost of living. What can you say about that?
Well, you know, I was talking to I asked this question of a realtor this week. And one thing is, of course, the SALT limit understandably reduces the value of some homes. And that is a real issue because people are less inclined to buy a very expensive home with high taxes if they're not going to be able to deduct. And therefore, the property value has declined. Some people can file the alternative minimum tax, which means the SALT deductibility issue does not apply to them. So it does not apply across the board. That being said, you know, I think people are very much concerned, particularly at the high end, in our communities, that they can't sell their home. I don't think it's as clear as we thought it would be that has across the board affected the sale of homes and home values, but the perception is clearly out there that my home is worth less. And again, there are homes where it's going to be true, homes, I think over $1 million, this realtor was telling me, there is a problem with them on the market. In a less expensive environment, or we didn't have the SALT, I think those homes they're so desirable.
But
Come
this
on
community,
now.
the homes are, you know, so many of the homes are well over $1 million.
Yes, and so again, some of it is perception and some of it is reality, because with the alternative minimum tax, you may not be impacted by the SALT deductibility issue. That being said, this thing is terrible for us, and we got to get rid of it. And the way to get rid of it is, frankly, to change the powers that be in Washington.
Let's move on to businesses, because a recent Tax Foundation report says New York is the second least friendly state. That means it ranks 49 out of 50, next to only New Jersey, in business friendliness, and it's based on higher cost difficulty, payroll tax, corporate income tax. Is there anything being done to make New York State more attractive to businesses?
Oh, I think I and my colleagues, we are a new majority. We started in January as the majority in the Senate. We hadn't been the majority for many, many years, except for a very small portion of time. We're very committed to making the state more business friendly. I'll tell you some things I'm interested in. Sure. One, I'm very interested in providing capital funding for small businesses. If you're going to open in Larchmont or Mamaroneck a wine shop, a pizza shop, and you need a small amount of money to borrow the money for a pizza oven, your racking and your signage, I think that we ought to create a program where it's easy to borrow a small amount of money from the state. You have to pay it back. It's not a grant, but it's a way to leg up for new businesses. Secondly, I think we ought to make the process of permits and licensing much more streamlined. In New York City, they have one place where you can go and get all your permits and license sort of mainstreamed. I think the state should do that. Whether you're a bar and you need a state liquor authority, then you need a local zoning ordinance. It is an
should be a
arduous
one-stop shop.
process. As much as possible, you have different municipalities, different rules. We ought to try to make it much easier. And then for large businesses, I'm very in favor of lots of the economic development that's happening all over Westchester, and certainly in New Rochelle and White Plains, and it's going to happen in Portchester. I think we have to be mindful. If we're going to give tax breaks, we shouldn't just give them out with very little transparency. So I have a number of bills to require much greater transparency about when tax benefits are given to corporations or other for-profit builders that come into our community. It's our tax money. I think there should be a greater give and take.
And will there be accountability that they are providing what they say they're going to provide?
Well, there already is in the law basically clawback provisions when they get some tax money or tax advantages, that if they don't meet their projected, for example, employment numbers, they have to give some of the money back. I want to see how often that happens, and I'm going to continue to press on that. So as very much a pro-development person, but I think development comes with sort of equal obligations, particularly if taxpayer money's on the line.
Now, when you go back to Albany in January, the budget is the primary thing that comes up. That's the big thing. And there've already been talk and news stories that there's a Medicaid deficit, or it's going to cause a deficit.
Right.
What do you know about that, and how is that going to affect us?
Well, what we know is pretty much, I think, what other people know. We have not been briefed yet by the division of the budget about the current shortfall in this year's budget, which ends March 31st, and projected budget going forward into next year. But we have seen reference by the division of the budget that there is, in the current year, a shortfall, which I think the providers like the hospitals and nursing homes know a little more about than we do yet. We will be briefed when the governor puts out his budget. But he has suggested there will be a shortfall in next year's budget from Medicaid shortfall moving forward from this year.
And does that mean that we will have higher income taxes or some other kind of taxes to cover it?
I don't know that it means that. I think what it means in terms of the budget process is that we in the legislature, who have to come up with a negotiated and agreed upon budget, are going to have to take from other sources and other places that we care about and put the money in to restore the cuts. That is traditionally how it works. So yes, at the end of the day, we look for revenue. I happen to be in favor of full gaming revenue for the 2 downstate casinos. No big secret about them. One is in my district, in Yonkers, the other is in Queens. There are ways to get revenue outside of taxes. We're losing that to New Jersey, in my opinion. We should authorize it downstate, create revenue, and help us if we have a budget shortfall. I'm not looking for taxes. I think taxes are last resort.
Okay, we're going to take another break, and when we come back, we're going to pivot to education.
Good.
Stay with us. We're talking to State Senator Shelley Mayer.
We're called Save the Sound, but really we're out to protect and restore the sound.
Protecting the sound is not new for the town of Mamaroneck. For those of you that have been around, it was the town of Mamaroneck and the village of Larchmont back in 1984 that actually put together and had the first adopted local waterfront revitalization plan in New York State. But since that time, there have been some other initiatives, and I want to talk about 2 of the more recent initiatives to address the issue of the quantity of stormwater that we're putting into the sound and also the quality of the stormwater that we're putting into the sound.
It's really important that every age knows what's going on. It's your backyard. That's what I tell everybody. I have kids that come in and they're asking why we're talking about the lake. And I'm like, this is an estuary. It's a huge, huge deal in the whole world. Like, there's not many estuaries out there. So, and you have 1,200 finfish, you have migratory birds, you have horseshoe crabs, which are extremely important to all of us, and a lot of people don't know.
Welcome back. We're talking to State Senator Shelley Mayer. Before we hit education, when we were off camera, I asked you to clarify what you meant on the casinos. So why don't you explain it?
So the downstate casinos, the Yonkers and in Queens, don't have full table games. They have what's called a racino, basically mostly slots. If we had full gaming license,
and they have virtual tables.
And they have virtual tables, which is like a picture of a person.
Right.
A croupier, but she's not real, I can assure you. If we had real full gaming license, that's what I call it, full table games, really full like you have in other kinds of casinos, we would have a tremendous source of revenue that in already established places that have excellent reputations, very, very reputable. MGM is in my district, the other one in Queens, they both are working together. This is a source of revenue for the state, and I think it's time we engage in this and allow this to go forward.
Okay. On the other hand,
Yes.
upstate or mid-state, whatever you call it, they put in a couple of new casinos and they're not meeting their target
No.
revenue numbers. So what's the difference? And
The
they're full
difference-
casinos.
The difference is this is downstate New York where the population density is driving an interest in full gaming, in going to a place that has full table games and all the economic development that goes with it. A hotel, a performance space, more employees, all things that are good for our local economy. Right now, those people are not going upstate. They're either going to one of the Indian or native gaming places that allows full gaming, or they're going to New Jersey or Pennsylvania. Right. This is revenue we're losing.
Okay. Many states, their casinos fund education. That's how I'm going to pivot to
Right.
education. Is that true in New York State?
Yes, the vast majority of the tax revenue from our racinos and our casinos goes into the state's funding of education for all the public schools in New York.
Great. And you are the chair of the Education Committee.
Correct.
But before I get into hardcore education questions, though, there was another school shooting in California today. 2 teenagers dead, a teenage suspect. What's going on? And more to the point, I guess, is there anything that New York State has on its books or has done to prevent that from happening here?
Well, first of all, I mean, it was really heartbreaking. I was driving around the district today in various places to hear the parents and the children, you know, and as a parent and a grandparent, just thinking about that moment. The child is locked in the school. They come, but they can't get in. The kid is locked. The kid is texting them saying everything is okay. Your heart is breaking. You know, all you want to do is hug your child. So it was a terrible day, and it's a terrible thing. We have done very well in New York by continuing to pass as much strong legislation to limit guns. We can't eliminate them, but with the SAFE Act that we passed after Sandy Hook, this year the extreme risk protection order to identify people who legally have guns and to ensure that a judge can determine if that person is a threat to themselves or others. That was a very important thing we did this year. It had been blocked for years. We've extended the waiting period for the legal purchase of guns. I have a gun buyback bill the governor signed. We have taken step after step in New York, particularly once we got to be the majority, to really act on this. But honestly, until the United States Senate steps up to the table and passes real gun limitations that are legitimate and protect the Second Amendment, but that move in this direction, we are just stuck in this problem. And it's really unacceptable.
But what is it that's making students do this? Is there something we should be doing to prevent this from happening in schools? I mean, there are a lot in schools where kids are doing this.
Well, of course we should do those, and many of those things we are doing. I mean, mental health needs of students are a serious issue in our high schools particularly. We need to address them. One, they're not mutually exclusive, and secondly, if kids don't have access to guns, the nature of the problem is different. That being said, of course we need to work on them, but what we can't let is the issue of mental health hijack the conversation about real gun legislation, which we need from the United States Congress, and the Senate is simply holding it on its desk.
Do the schools here have the tools to deal with kids who have guns? And you may or may not know that there has been a parent chatter in this community about a high school student bringing a gun to a party. And
I didn't know that.
And parents are quite upset,
Of course.
about it and feel as though nothing is being done. Yes, it didn't happen at school, but it could.
It could happen at school.
And-
it could. So the things we can do. So just an example of the extreme risk protection order, what they call the red flag law. If someone knows, like they did in Parkland, that this child who had a gun legally was a danger to himself and others, The mother tried to get the police to do something. They didn't have the tools. We have now enacted the law where you as a parent, a teacher, or law enforcement can petition a court and say, this person, this child, or this adult has a gun and is a danger. We have tools. Do we have everything? No, we don't. But we continue to do as much as we can, and this year we passed very, very strong additional legislation to reduce the risk. We have kids who have serious issues in our schools. It's a very sorry state of affairs. We need to deal with it, but we cannot let it hijack the other issue.
Okay, we are going to take another break, and we will come back and talk about education funding in this community.
Sure.
Stay with us. We're talking to State Senator Shelley Mayer.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Jordan knows he shouldn't eat this entire bowl of nachos, but tonight he's earned that right. Because a few hours ago, in the middle of happy hour, he recognized a sign. Not from the gods or a bolt of lightning, but from a double heart, a kissy face, and a fourth ha in ha ha ha. That's when Jordan knew he was buzzed. So when it was time to go, he got a ride home instead of driving. Be a legend like Jordan. Recognize your buzzed warning signs and get a ride home. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
Welcome back. We're talking to State Senator Shelley Mayer, and you can still get your questions and comments in. The contact information's on your screen. Shelley, back on education. Tell us, are the school districts here, Rhinebeck and Mamaroneck, are we getting more funding?
Well, each year we get more, but the question is how is it allocated, and is it allocated fairly based on need? So I have been traveling throughout the state. I had a big roundtable here in the Hudson Valley. I was in Long Island yesterday. I've been in Buffalo, Syracuse. We're going to be in Queens and Manhattan. We are re-examining the way the state money flows to the schools and whether the formula, which is a provision in New York law, accurately measures need and property value, because those are the two basic underpinnings of how much districts get. All of our districts, particularly high-achieving districts like we have here, need to continue to get adequate state support to do as well. I was in Mamaroneck High School this week, for Veterans Day with a fantastic program, absolutely top-of-the-line program, allowing middle school students to actually talk one-on-one with veterans about their experience in a personal way. You know, we are blessed with these terrific schools. We need to provide them with adequate funding. We do increase the funding, and we work with them on specific technical changes they need to assist them in the operation of the school, dealing with the state education department. Do we get enough for our districts? No, and my district goes from Yonkers to Bedford and includes some very special needy districts like Yonkers, Portchester. There's others along the path that have unique needs, and I have responsibility of the whole state. But my primary responsibility is to make sure that the districts in our district do as well as they need. So we're going to continue to fight for more funding. That is, we believe the state owes substantially more to public schools throughout the state.
We hear about teachers around the country actually saying that they don't have the resources they need in their classrooms, buying their own school supplies, for example. What can be done here to make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, first place, you know, we're blessed, we're really fortunate in the Sound Shore to have this supportive parent community that really steps up and helps not supplement in sort of only in a financial way, but a community of support for our public schools. And I think that is a model. So yes, in some districts we have teachers who don't have the resources to get what they need, and I have some of them in my district. We need to build, one, enough state funding, two, make sure the money is used wisely so it actually goes to the teacher supplies and not into some big bureaucracy. And three, continue to build a group of community support. And one of the great joys of representing this community is seeing how there is this full, robust community support for our great public schools here. And I think it should be a model, whether we have a foundation or you have the parent group, whatever you have, that is a sense these schools belong to us and we want them to succeed. That is a key part. It's not just money. Money is not the success of all schools. We need money and we need the other piece as well.
Let's shift to justice reform because new criminal laws are taking effect January 2020, and they make some substantial changes, particularly as to bail or no bail and whether people are held in jail or not. Can you briefly explain the changes?
Well, I think the major goal of the change was to change the current system, which, as a practical matter, in many courts, if you had money and you were charged with a misdemeanor, you did not go to jail. You posted bail. Bail was, you had the money to post bail. You were able to, you had to come back to court. That was the main purpose of bail, to ensure you come back to court for your return date. That is what bail is about. Judges were using bail for serious crimes, and that's very understandable for felonies, but in misdemeanors, it was really largely based on the ability to pay. And I think that many of us, myself included, think that's not the purpose of bail. And for crimes in which it's not the seriousness of the crime, it's just our respective abilities to pay, that shouldn't determine whether I'm in jail prior to the review of the case. I'm presumed innocent, same as the other person. So we changed the law primarily with respect to misdemeanors, where basically you do get a ticket and you have to come back to court.
And what if you don't?
Well, if you don't, then it's a different crime, and it may jump into a more serious crime where a judge can impose a pre-sentence incarceration under some circumstances. Certainly serious felonies, judges retain that right. I believe judges should have more discretion. In the process of negotiating a bill, there were many proposals that went much further than what we adopted. I did not support them. I believe judges should need some discretion. But the fact is, we had some cases where discretion was severely abused, including a case where a child was in jail for 3 years for a stolen
I think many people would understand some of these changes for nonviolent crimes, but included in this are some potentially violent crimes like robbery and burglary in the second degree, where someone does in fact have a weapon, whether or not it's used, for one of them that somebody is actually injured. And if I were a victim of that crime and the person who was charged with that crime was not put in jail, I'd be pretty upset about it.
Yes, I would be too, but I would say two things. One is the DA, if they have the right evidence, can charge with a more serious felony, which triggers the ability to incarcerate. So it's based on the facts. Secondly, the person is presumed innocent, and the bail is intended to ensure they return to court. So should certain crimes have been excluded? We went back and forth. I did not win on all my fights about this. I think some things can be revisited. I've told people, I've met with the DA's office, I've talked to a number of the police chiefs. People should bring their concerns instead of just sort of broad brush, it's all terrible. No, we did some very good things for New York's criminal justice system, and if there are areas in which we should modify or grant some changes, people should come forward with those ideas, and we should take them to Albany and see if we can get consensus. I'm one of 63 senators, there's 150 assembly members, and there's a governor. You need an advocate, you need a spokesperson, you need someone who's going to fight hard. I am that person. Yeah, I can't win every battle.
So you hear that, everyone. She wants to hear from you if you have concerns about the criminal reform or any other issues.
Absolutely.
We're going to take another break, probably our last one, so stay with us.
There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. She gave them some broth without any bread and kissed them all soundly.
Lights out.
And put them to bed. Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org.
Mrs. and Mrs. Jimmy and Minnie Bew. I came from 5 generations of teachers. Losing my job was the bottom falling out of my world.
Welcome back. We're talking to State Senator Shelley Mayer. Shelley, Census 2020, it's on the table.
Big deal.
Tell us why it's a big deal, what it affects.
It really affects every facet of how the federal government funds the state and how programs come down into our community. It affects our school funding, and it affects redistricting. So it is intended to count every person that is living here. It is not going to ask a question about immigration status, although at one time that was proposed. There's 3 ways you can participate, either online, in person, or on the old kind of paper way. But it is a daunting task to get everyone to participate. And why do we need it? Because if we undercount, which we have traditionally done in parts of New York, in many of our communities, we don't get the resources and we will lose representation in Congress.
So that's what I was going to get to. So it determines how many representatives the state will have?
Yes. Congress members, obviously we're going to have 2 senators, and it affects our New York State legislature, Assembly, and Senate, because each of us have to have fairly round numbers of the same numbers in our district.
Okay. We have a caller, so I'm going to interrupt my questioning. Caller, go ahead. You're with Senator Mayer.
How you doing? I'm Mark Thompson. I'm a registered Democrat. I live in Mamaroneck, New York. And this is my question. Hi. It seems to me that the news about climate change is getting worse and worse every day. And we all know that climate change is caused primarily by burning fossil fuels. Yet the New York Common Pension Fund has over $10 billion invested in the fossil fuel industry. So my question is, do you favor divestment, which means selling off coal, gas, and oil as a way to fight climate change?
Well, I appreciate the question.
Thank you, caller, and I'm going to let you answer his question.
So I'm very, very concerned about climate change. We passed, as I think the caller probably knows, the strongest climate protection act in the country this year, which is a fantastic bill, mostly aspirational, but it has some specific things. With respect to the specific question of divestment, I'm concerned about telling the controller of the state of New York, who's done an excellent job in managing a whole state's pension fund and trying to make morally and ethically responsible decisions, sort of where he can and can't invest his money. I am in favor of prodding and pushing and persuading him that the best investments must reflect a knowledge and a commitment to addressing climate change. And I'm going to continue down that path. If I feel that that path of persuasion and pushiness is not getting to my desired goal, then I would pursue a path of much stronger action about divestment.
So are you saying that you would put a moral goal or your ethical goal over a return on investment?
Well, not quite like that. For example, in the early days of apartheid, you know, the comptroller made decisions about what companies they were going to invest in. This is not one versus the other. In a world where climate change is a crisis, we need that to be part of the conversation. You obviously need a return on investment, and I'm very concerned about all the people in New York who are dependent on the state comptroller's decisions. That's why I am not signing on to a mandate that he divest himself. I am trying to persuade him through my pushiness and working with my colleagues to make the best decisions that reflect that climate change must be part of the conversation.
Okay. I want to get back to the census because how do we get everyone counted? And I want you to explain again why it's so important that everyone in the state be counted.
Well,
whatever your political party or affiliation.
It has nothing to do with party. It has nothing to do with immigration status either. Every person who lives here ought to be counted because it will affect, one, how much money we get from Washington, how much money your school district gets from the state of New York, how many Congress members represent New York, how much power New York has. When we talk about SALT, you know, we need as much power in Washington representing how much money New York gives to our federal government, and we need the decisions that reflect our values. So we need the appropriate number of Congress members that represent us. And we can't have that unless our census shows that we have the correct number of people to justify it. And so I've been working with the complete count committees throughout the county. I know the county executives created a countywide one. We're trying to come up with a path to encourage as much census participation in every community as possible. I know they've done it in Mamaroneck. I believe in Larchmont, too, they have the committee. And if we don't do it, we run the distinct risk of losing some number of Congress members in the next redistricting.
What do you say to people who are afraid to be counted, that it's ICE knocking on their door, or that it's, someone else who...
Well, we had the director, one of the outreach directors of the New York Census Bureau, speak in New Rochelle at an immigrant forum that I sponsored, and assured people there that this information will not be shared with ICE. It has nothing to do with ICE, and we will take every step to facilitate and aid people. Is it going to be easy to persuade people because the president started out by saying we're going to ask this question, and that really poisoned the conversation? It shouldn't have been in there. The question is not going to be asked, and it's our job, if we care about the future of New York, to ensure that all of our neighbors participate.
Shelley Mayer, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I hope you will come back.
Of course, Maura. Thank you.
And that's it for the Local Live. We hope you enjoyed our roundtable, and we'll see you at our next show.